Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive into power dynamics, and this is rooted in a collaboration. So unexpected. It sounds like a literary fever dream.
It really does.
We're talking Robert Greene, the historian, author of The 48 Laws of Power, teaming up with Curtis Jackson, who everyone knows as the rapper and mogul 50 Cent.
That's right. And the sources for this deep dive, they're all centered on the book that came out of it, The 50th Law. And the premise is pretty revolutionary.
Which is?
That true enduring power, it stems from utter fearlessness. So our mission today is to understand how that kind of fearlessness is, manufactured, because it isn't just a personality trait.
Right.
How it totally redefines your reality, and most importantly, how you can actually internalize this 50th law.
Greene famously called 50 Cent a master player at power, a kind of hip-hop Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah.
But, is that comparison really fair? Napoleon was a conqueror who, in the end, failed spectacularly.
And was exiled, yeah. It's a great question. I think Greene's fascination was more in their shared worldview, not necessarily the final trajectory.
Okay.
The connection started way back in 2006, and what really struck Greene immediately was that despite their wildly different backgrounds, Southside Queens and the crack epidemic versus a historian in Hollywood, they both had this incredibly cynical and realistic view of human motivation.
They both looked right past the nice, the benign explanations people give for their actions and just went straight to figuring out what people were really up to.
Exactly. Greene realized that the historical landscape he studies and the streets 50 Cent came from, they both require that same level of piercing realism. It's a survival skill, really.
And that led to that intensive observation period in 2007, right?
It did, and the access he got was just incredible.
Yeah, he wasn't just sitting in boardrooms. He was following 50 Cent through these high-powered business meetings 1 minute and the next.
The next, he's witnessing the chaotic reality of the operation, like a spontaneous, full-on fistfight breaking out among 50's own employees that 50 himself had to break up.
Wow.
He saw the whole theater of power. He watched 50 Cent calmly manufacture a fake crisis for the press, just for publicity. And the social fluidity was amazing, mingling with European royalty and then friends from the hood, sometimes in the same day.
So after all that, after watching all these different sides of him, what was the one quality Greene isolated, the thing that was the real source of his power?
His conclusion was surprisingly simple: utter fearlessness, but it's not the loud, intimidating swagger people see in public.
No.
Behind the scenes, he's cool, strategic, very calculating. He's just willing to do what other people in the corporate world simply will not risk.
And the sources really pinpoint where that quality comes from. It's a deep psychological position.
It is. Having grown up in a place where he genuinely didn't expect to live past 25, he developed this core belief that he has nothing left to lose.
He's playing with house money.
Totally. Every day, every deal, every challenge, it's all a bonus. So in the corporate world, where everyone else is afraid of losing their mortgage or upsetting the board, this attitude gives him immense leverage. If a deal isn't perfect, he just walks away.
So the philosophical summary of the book is really that our fears aren't just mental, they're like a physical force.
They're a prison, yeah. They confine your actions to a very limited, predictable range. The less you fear failure, confrontation, being different, the more power you have, and ultimately more fulfillment.
But to really get how powerful this is today, we have to look back at how fear itself has kind of mutated.
We've absolutely moved from a healthy, protective emotion to something much more insidious.
How so?
Well, in primitive times, fear was simple, right? You see a saber-toothed cat, you run. It was about facing war, disaster, real, imminent death. It served a useful function.
But here's the paradox the book talks about. As we gain more control over the world, as those immediate terrors became less common, our fears didn't go away.
They multiplied. They absolutely multiplied. We traded that simple, intense fear of something real for this generalized internal anxiety. We started worrying about our status, about rejection, about health issues that might never happen, about aging.
And modern media just pours gasoline on that fire.
That's the decisive moment. The sources trace this to the 19th century. Advertisers and journalists figured out that if you frame an appeal with fear, you capture attention. It's an emotion we just can't resist.
So they create this constantly shifting spotlight on new anxieties, a new health scare, a crime wave, the latest social mistake you can make.
And it all feeds this feeling that we're incredibly fragile creatures, even though the data shows we live in a world that is, and I'm quoting here, infinitely safer and more predictable than our ancestors ever knew.
And that's the real trap. We go from feeling fear because of a threat to just having a fearful attitude toward life itself.
We exaggerate our own vulnerability. We instantly focus on what could go wrong. And that is so dangerous when real trouble hits, because fear's only command is to retreat and retrench.
Which is exactly why attitude is what they call the nice edge.
If we retreat, it's a downward spiral. And this is where the Great Depression becomes the ultimate case study.
We're talking Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1933. The country is in absolute despair.
Total despair. Banks are failing. Unemployment is through the roof. But FDR's main concern, according to the sources, wasn't just economic.
It was psychological.
It was psychological. He knew the economic collapse was bad, but the paralyzing public mood, that fearful attitude, was actively preventing any kind of solution. People had just stopped trying.
And when he gives that famous quote calling fear unjustified terror, what gives it its actual power? Because that could sound a little hollow coming from a wealthy politician.
He contextualized it. He reminded everyone that they'd faced worse before, like the Civil War. He said recovery depended on their own resolve, and then he delivered the line.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
And that just perfectly outlines the self-fulfilling dynamic. You give in to fear, you lose energy, you lose momentum. Your lack of confidence leads to inaction, which makes you even less confident.
A psychological death spiral.
FDR helped people see they had a choice. They could see the crisis as a challenge, an opportunity to prove their mettle, or they could retreat. And by choosing the former, they turned a negative into a positive and drove action.
So if attitude is the key, the next logical question is how do you forge it? The sources make a distinction between passive and active ways of dealing with fear.
Right. Most of us, most of the time, are in what they call the passive avoidance mode. We put off hard decisions, we choose comfort, we basically assume that we're fragile, that facing the thing we dread will just break us.
And then there's the active way, which usually just happens to you. A disaster, a loss, something is thrust upon you. The sources say these moments are oddly therapeutic, but the effect doesn't always last.
Right. The truly fearless types are the ones whose lives force them to confront fear in that active mode over and over again. The battlefield, poverty, political turmoil, their spirit gets challenged repeatedly. And this process, it hardens them to the point of steel.
And this defensive act of overcoming fear eventually flips and becomes an offensive, fearless attitude. You think about Napoleon, 1800. Getting ready to lead his army into Italy.
His experienced field marshals, they warned him, the Alps are impassable this time of year. They were paralyzed by the fear of this known massive obstacle.
But Napoleon, who came up during the total chaos of the French Revolution, he saw the opportunity in the impossible, and his response was just iconic.
For Napoleon's army, there shall be no Alps.
Just an incredible line.
It wasn't just bravado. He personally drove the advance. His sheer will got them through, and they achieved total surprise and victory. The lesson is that for a fearless person, there are no obstacles that can stand in your way because you refuse to let the obstacle even exist in your mind.
Or you look at Frederick Douglass. I mean, slavery was a system built entirely on fear.
And Douglass just systematically dismantled that system inside himself. He secretly taught himself to read, which was a huge risk. Then, when he was being whipped, he fought back. A terrifying, impulsive act.
But he noticed he was whipped less after that. He realized fear was the currency they used for control.
He kept raising the stakes on his own boldness, escaped with nothing, became this famous abolitionist, and then, against the wishes of the establishment, he founded his own anti-slavery newspaper.
At every step, he faced these incredibly powerful forces, but instead of retreating, he just kept amplifying his own defiance.
And we have to remember, this forging process isn't just for war or poverty. Great adversity can hit anyone. Look at FDR again.
Right. He was wealthy, successful, and then at 39, boom, polio, paralyzed from the waist down.
That loss of physical control was his crucible. He refused to give in to the terror and depression, and that personal active fight forged the indomitable spirit that let him later rally an entire nation. It proves that any deep encounter with adversity can be the catalyst.
Which brings us back to the modern version of this type. 50 Cent, forged in the Wild West-like environment of Southside Queens during the 80s crack epidemic.
Yeah, and that chaotic education, ironically, is a perfect fit for the disorder and innovation you need to succeed in the 21st century business world.
His path had these three brutal rituals of initiation. First, abandonment. His mom was murdered when he was 8, never knew his dad. That forced this immediate self-reliance.
Second was the hustle. Daily violence taught him that showing fear was just an invitation for abuse, so he had to repeatedly put himself in these anxiety-inducing situations until the fear meant nothing.
And the third, which is maybe the hardest test for anyone, was the pivot. At 20, he was a success on the streets, but he knew it had a ceiling. He cut all ties and jumped into the music industry with no plan B.
Leaving the familiar, even if it's dangerous, for total uncertainty. That takes massive fearlessness. But the ultimate test, of course, was in May 2000. He was shot 9 times.
And the aftermath was just brutal. Columbia Records dropped him. The industry blackballed him. He was seen as a liability. Friends turned on him.
And instead of retreating, he did the exact opposite. He felt that brush with death had literally caused the last bits of fear to bleed out.
Yeah.
And that gave him this profound, unconventional freedom.
He had nothing left to lose, so he just ignored the entire industry playbook.
He launched his own mixtape campaign, operating with this raw, bold energy that was completely unrestrained. And that freedom, that's what allowed him to create his own circumstances and led to his massive success.
And that really gets to the core mechanics of the 50th law. The fundamental idea is that we have very little control over our circumstances.
But we have total control over the mindset with which we respond.
And overcoming fear, that dramatically increases your margin of control. It lets you move from just reacting to actively creating the circumstances. So what are the 4 qualities of these fearless types?
First is supreme boldness. This is more than just confidence. It's an audacious act that changes the dynamic. When 50 Cent started G-Unit Records, he used his own name, which was toxic at the time, to force his artists into the spotlight. That level of conviction often just eliminates obstacles because people instinctively believe it must be justified.
Second is unconventionality. Overcoming that deep social fear of sticking out, 50 Cent said, the greatest fear people have is that of being themselves. Fearless types embrace their difference, and that compels attention and translates into control.
Third, fluidity. They embrace chaos because they see opportunity in it. They don't try to micromanage everything. They move with the flow of events and gently channel them. They can turn a negative surprise like being blackballed into a competitive advantage because they adapt faster than their timid rivals.
And fourth, urgency. This often comes, like it did for 50, from a real awareness of life's shortness. That urgency prevents the procrastination that paralyzes so many people. It creates momentum that helps you determine what happens next.
And the warning here is absolutely vital. The conservative, fearful approach, always trying to protect what you have, is the quickest way to lose it. Fear is an invisible prison that just narrows your options until you can't adapt anymore.
So the path to power is always the active mode. Entering those arenas you shy away from, making the hard decisions, confronting people, and putting yourself first, instead of always trying to please others. Confronting fear brings you closer to reality.
It forces you to deal with what is, not what you wish was happening or what you fear might happen.
And the key takeaway here for you, the listener, is that you don't need a life of violence or a gunshot wound to develop this. Adversity is part of life for all of us. The choice is simply how you process it.
It's a power of reversal. Every time you actively overcome a negative fear, it leads directly to a positive quality, like self-reliance or supreme self-confidence. You just have to choose confrontation over retreat.
And finally, on that theme of action versus caution, let's leave you with a pretty provocative thought on this from Niccolo Machiavelli, who definitely understood the boldness required to succeed.
He argued, "It is better to be impetuous than cautious, because fortune is a woman, and if you wish to dominate her, you must beat her and batter her. It is clear that she will let herself be won by men who are impetuous rather than by those who step cautiously." Ponder the profound power that lies in that kind of bold, urgent, and fearless movement.